Good evening. I'm Travis Warren with Municipal Assessment Services Group, and I'm the assessor for the town of Peace River, and it's a pleasure to be here. There is a slideshow presentation that will accompany my presentation here. Alrighty, starting from the beginning, this is a presentation of the 2024 assessments for the town of Peace River. So we are going to be in the 2025 tax year, and the assessments are always, for lack of a better term, a year behind. So the assessment values reflect July 1 last year, regardless of what year we're currently in. So that's what we'll be talking about today. Brief outline and introduction. I'm with Municipal Assessment Services Group. I'm Travis Horn. I'm the president of the company. I've been doing assessment for almost 20 years, and I'm a bit of an assessment nerd. So please feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions about assessment. We'll go over the types of assessment. For the most part, there's really effectively two types, which is residential and non-residential. We'll touch on a little bit the regulated assessment properties, which include railways and designated industrial properties. Then we'll get into some of the assessment methodologies. How do we develop these values on an annual basis? How do we reflect what's going on in the market? How do we stay current? Within that is data collection. Where does the assessor get the information? How do we know that it's right? And then we're going to get a little bit more detailed in terms of the assessment change for the town of Peace River. I've focused on single-family residential homes to give the council an idea of where some of the shifts are in terms of the degree, whether they've gone up 5%, 10%, down 20%, that sort of thing. So as you can see, based on the introduction, the next slide is myself. So there's my credentials. An overview of assessment is that it's done annually. So as I mentioned earlier, it's always a year behind, with the valuation date being July 1 of the previous year. The assessments are required to be developed using mass appraisal, and that is using a group of data to value the entire inventory for the entire municipality, in this case, obviously the town of Peace River. The goal of the assessment is to efficiently value every property, developing a market value estimate as of July 1, the previous year. And there are effectively two types of property, residential and non-residential. The goal of property assessment is to develop a dollar value attributable to property. Now, the concept behind that is not unlike income tax, where the more money somebody earns, the higher taxes you pay. The assessment process in Alberta is based on ad valorem principles. So that means if you own something more valuable than something next to you, you would pay a higher proportion based on the difference in that value. The goal is to equally distribute the property tax burden throughout the municipality, allowing the municipality to operate to the level it needs to based on the budgeting. It is a keystone in municipal operation, in my view. Assessment and taxation are not the same thing. Often, if you're talking to a ratepayer, they believe that their taxes have gone up and that means their assessment's gone up, or vice versa. That's not always the case. Assessments, if tomorrow they tripled, the city or the town wouldn't all of a sudden need triple the budget to operate. So although the assessment can increase or decrease, the budget or the taxation revenue required based on that starting point of the municipal assessment values remains somewhat constant based on which direction council would like to go. So at a high level, there's market value assessments, which include residential and non-residential, and regulated assessments, and those are developed by the province. Market value for all the residential and non-residential homes and businesses and property in the town reflect a most probable price, not the highest, not the lowest, or the average. I recall back 20 years ago when I was studying, if I had used an average or a median in my workbooks and what have you for University of British Columbia, I would actually lose marks. There's more to it than just simply saying, well, here's the midpoint of the data. That's got to be the market. You have to look closer at things. So market value assumes unrelated transactions between parties. So not a father selling to a son, or a forced sale due to a bank foreclosure, things like that. In order to develop an accurate depiction of market, you have to look at open market sales within a reasonable time frame with unrelated parties. And you have to consider the present and potential use of the property. So, for example, there is a property in a location that is changing. And what I mean by that is, for lack of a better term, gentrification. Somebody may buy something that may appear to be not a very desirable property, but may see the potential use or potential revised use of that property down the road. That is something that can also affect the market value. Regulated value. So these are the properties that are valued by the province. Municipal Assessment Affairs does the valuation of those. Municipal Assessment Services Group, MASG, myself, that is outside of our scope. A number of years ago, the province also designated a number of industrial properties that would be done provincially and not locally. So this would include certain types of properties like farmland, designated industrial property, and linear property. And linear property now also includes the railways. Some key dates that you may want to be aware of that are important in terms of the assessment process. As I said, this is probably the fourth or fifth time, July 1, 2024. That's the valuation date. That's the hypothetical date upon which every property that we value sells, an estimate of what it would sell for based on market value. Now, the condition date of that property is not the same date as its January or July 1 date. The condition date is actually December 31st, 2024, so about 6 months after that. So that date is important because if December 31st, 2024, a house has been completed, a brand new build on a vacant lot, if it's completed December 31st, 2024, we take that information and hypothetically develop what the value would have been had it sold back on July 1st. Granted, July 1st, the property wasn't complete, but that's the system and how it works in terms of what the condition date is.
Does it work backwards too? If your house burns between July 1 and December 31st?
Yes, it does. So for example, if you have a home burned down in September, as of December 31st, it's a vacant lot. That's how it's valued, as though it existed as a vacant lot on July 1st, earlier that year. Good question. Mass appraisal. Mass appraisal is dissimilar to single property appraisal. So if you go to get a mortgage, if you're going to refinance, you contact an appraiser and they do a report on your property that the bank takes a look at and decides whether or not they lend you the money. Mass appraisal is doing that thousands of times using statistical models and analyses based on the characteristics of the entire town and the sales data underlying that information. So leading up to July 1, 2024, all the sales information is used to determine what the entire population would theoretically sell for on July 1st, because as we all know, not everything is going to sell leading up to valuation date. You are only ever going to have a small percentage of your population transact in the market. Mass appraisal is a methodology that allows us to figure out, based on what is sold, what the value of the unsold should be as of July 1st. There are three approaches to value. The sales comparison approach, which takes a look at sales, property that are similar, and develops a value. There's the cost approach, which considers the value of the land, the value of the building, less depreciation and wear and tear. That's a valuation approach there. And then also the income approach. And the income approach reflects the return on investment one would expect based on acquiring a property that generates rental revenue.
So can you explain that one a little bit more? Is that for housing, apartments, or?
Excellent question. So I'm going to try and stay out of the weeds a little bit here, but this is something I do like to talk about. So that first approach, the sales approach, that is actually applied in every approach. So it is really, in my view, better termed the direct comparison approach. And you need to understand that in order to, for example, in the cost approach, develop a land value. Because if you're going to develop land values, the first step is to do the direct comparison approach on sales of vacant land. And then from that, there is a published cost manual that develops the cost value of property based on its nature. The vast majority of property in the town of Peace River is done using the cost approach. So it is the land value plus the cost it would be to replace the improvement, not replicate it. If it's a special property, we're not trying to find the value of, some fancy, wallpaper or carpet that was discontinued 20 years ago. It is a replacement with similar utility. And then once we have that value, we consider the depreciation. It's 5 years old, 10 years old, and we deduct that off the improvement value. You add those together, the land value and the depreciated improvement value, and then you have an estimate of market. And that is checked against sales that have occurred. So it's not simply just saying, well, land value, improvement value, less depreciation, we're done. That goes back to the market. What occurred in the town leading up to July 1st? Are the land values and our costing values, when combined, do they reflect what's actually occurring when somebody buys or sells a home in the town? So there is that, that check there. In terms of the income approach, there's not many that are done on income in the town of Peace River. Multi-residential does employ it. And what that means is the number of apartment buildings. We estimate a market revenue for each suite. Then we annualize that over the entire year. Then we deduct a typical vacancy and then a typical operating expense, which would include things attributable to the building, repairs and maintenance, upkeep, operations, marketing, things like that. Things that are not included in that are things like mortgage payments and capital expenditures. And then from that, we develop a net operating income. So if you're looking to buy a property that generates revenue, what really is of interest to you is how much money is really going to be in my pocket once, I've accounted for, the maintenance and the upkeep and, the renting it out and all that sort of thing. It distills down to the net operating income, which, like we discussed earlier, has to be reflective of market. So it's not what that property is actually achieving, it's what would the typical be if it was operating. So you may have a property that is overachieving or underachieving. The overachieving properties are not assessed higher, and the underachieving properties are not assessed lower. They're assessed on what's typical in the market. Is there anything else I can elaborate on, Doug?
So, comes to mind if an apartment building burns down after July 1 and before December or something, what does that do for number 3 there? Or does it?
Excellent question. I think it's apt because we did have obviously a scenario like that. So in that instance, it's not a matter of saying, well, it's burnt, it's not worth anything. Now maybe it should just be land value. The best approach in my view is to consider what a typical purchaser or what a typical investor would look for in that type of asset. You're always going to have highs and lows in terms of occupancy in a property. You're going to have damage. You're going to have, repair and maintenance. This is a bit different. So in this case, it's not to say that the property, even though it is partially burnt and inoperable, to say that it's not worth anything at all. The best way to account for that is to understand that anybody buying it is going to look at the revenue potential and account for the damage. And the damage and the inability to rent those suites ties back into the vacancy or the occupancy of the property. What is the occupancy probable, or what could the occupancy be reasonably based on the market as of December 31st, 2024. So in that case, instead of saying it would just be land value, a better approach in my view is to increase the vacancy deduction in the income approach to a much, much higher percentage than what's typical, because half-burnt properties aren't typical.
Can you increase it to 100% vacancy because nobody's in there?
You can increase it to 100% in some instances. I haven't seen a scenario where 100% vacancy or a 0% vacancy would be considered by a prudent investor. Because if somebody was going to go buy something, they would typically say at some point, this thing, maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but over the investment horizon, which for me may be 15 years, and then the reversion of the asset at the very end where I turn around and sell it. Over these 15 years, I estimate 10% vacancy. It's going to go up, it's going to go down, but at no point would, in my opinion, a reasonable investor say, I'm going to estimate no vacancy at any point over my investment horizon, or I'm going to estimate 100% vacancy over the investment horizon. Those two extremes, in my view, don't really align with the actions of investors.
So we have to look at it from the investor person's approach, not the reality of can it be rented today, kind of thing.
I mean, we don't disregard what's happening there today, but we also account for the fact that an investor isn't going to just look at what's there today. They're going to look at what's possible or potential in the future.
Through your worship, is the sales method or income method also used for hotel accommodations, and does it also for restaurants and stuff?
My understanding is that right now the hotels and the restaurants are done using, for the majority, the cost approach. I don't think any of them are done on income offhand.
Sorry. So is that by choice of the assessor, or is that legislation?
Good question. Typically, properties that operate to generate revenue are recommended to be valued using the income approach. And the steps to the income approach, I'll try and give you briefly, is to collect revenue information from the market. You know, what are you renting for? What are you renting for? How big is it? You know, where is it? That sort of thing. What kind of vacancy is the market experiencing? What kind of expenses is the market experiencing? And anywhere that there are, you know, operating real estate investment properties, there's going to be that sort of information. However, the problem is, will you have enough sales of those types of properties to generate an accurate capitalization rate? Because that is the linchpin upon which all the other parts of the income approach sit, is the capitalization rate. And the capitalization rate is a ratio of the potential income of the property versus its sales price. So you can have, say, 400 investment properties and collect all the rent, all the vacancy, and all the expenses on all of them, figure out what the market is doing and all that sort of thing. But if you don't have sales of those types of properties, it's all for naught. Because in my view, it would not be a great idea to use the sale of a warehouse, because that's all you have, to value a hotel, and vice versa. So that's really the linchpin, and when the income approach can be applied is the depth and breadth of information for those investment properties when they sell. Is not only do you need a handful of sales, you need sales across the spectrum of what exists out there.
So, sorry, in theory then, if we found all of a sudden there was a change of ownership and multiple properties of that nature, then as the assessor, you could switch or would switch to that evaluation method, potentially.
We would take a very close look at it, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, as I had mentioned earlier, part of the mass appraisal process is data collection, and a big piece of that is collecting information on sales. And the sales are, used as part of the process of estimating the market value for the assessments. And it analyzes a group of similar properties at a specific point in time. So, for example, if you had a group of warehouses, or if you had a group of hotels, or a group of strip malls, that would be something that would then relate back to evaluate those types of properties. And they're used to determine typical conditions for properties with similar characteristics. Additionally, in the data collection is the inspections. So the properties, as I mentioned, not everything's going to sell every year, obviously. Only a small fraction is going to sell. But we make it a point, and it's professional best practice, to take a look at the properties that haven't sold as well, to make sure that we're up to date on their characteristics, so that when we apply the valuation, when we apply the information we know from what has sold to the inventory, that it's being applied correctly.
So, somebody, such as me, might have received a form in the mail, I don't know, a couple of years ago, wanting details about how much carpet, how much square footage, blah, blah, blah. Very detailed. How does that come into this? Or if you're coming up to it in the presentation, leave the question.
No, please, interrupt and ask me. So that is a form of inspection.
Okay.
So we found that fairly often, in lieu of bothering a homeowner, knocking on the door, leaving a door hanger, setting up an appointment, getting the little booties, putting them on, walking through the whole house, we found some reasonable, not reasonable. We've found some very good success in terms of people letting us know what has or hasn't happened with their property. So, for example, it's very rare that we see a scenario where somebody fills out that type of form in a way that they're trying to, for lack of a better term, game the system. Like if we say, we have it on record that you have around 800 square feet of finished basement, and it's replied back saying, I've never had a basement. Well, it's pretty easy to identify and flag that sort of thing.
Councillor Ford?
How often are those inspections done as far as doing an individual's house?
We make it a point to do 20% of the population of the town a year. So offhand, I don't know exactly how many, hundreds or almost thousands that is, but we want to make sure that we take a look at every property at least once within 5 years. That way we know that we are current in terms of applying, the valuation model, as well as when somebody gets their assessment, it's accurate. It's going to reflect the fact that they do have a finished basement, or it's going to reflect the fact that they knocked down their carport and they don't have that anymore. That lessens a lot of the concerns that ratepayers have when they look at their assessment and it doesn't jive with what they know to be true about their property. So that's the overview of the assessment process. Now, in terms of the assessments for 2025 tax year, but the 2024 assessment year, we have a summary of the assessment total and change, and this is for the entire population of the town. So overall, for residential type properties, we've seen an increase of about 2.91%. For non-residential linear, and again, that's the type of property that is valued by the province, we're seeing an increase of about 4.6. And for the designated industrial property, again, valued by the province, we're not seeing very much change at all. And as you can see the table down there, I'm skipping ahead. The table down there, the dip non-residential, very, very minuscule in terms of the overall valuation of the town, unlike other municipalities where the majority of their assessment role is driven by the dip. So in terms of the non-residential properties, we're seeing an increase of about 1.32% overall. And non-residential would include things like retail, warehouse, hotels, that sort of thing. And machinery and equipment, we're seeing an increase around 5.12%. And then farmland about 1.13%. And I'd like to pause on farmland for just a moment, because farmland, unlike single-family residential, unlike the retail and the warehouses and offices and that sort of thing, farmland is valued based on publications from the province. So they determine what valuation is attributable to different types of farm, whether it's bush, whether it's, gray Luvasol or sandy loam. Those are the only two types of soils I can remember from soils class. But anyways, the province determines what those are, and as the assessor locally, we apply what the province determines. In terms of the summary overall and the breakdown, as you can see on this graph here, the vast majority of the value for the entire town comes from residential property at around 642 million. Again, you can see there the dip non-residential the dip non-residential. It's only 31,620. It's a very tiny fraction. It doesn't even get up to a 0.01%. Farmland, very small. Machinery equipment, very small. The non-residential is second only to residential, with the non-residential coming in at around 251 million. Then we have the linear and the railway. Those are, again, those things valued by the province.
Did you mention something that the railway, there was a change in the rules about railways or something?
Yes, this was some time ago. I should probably update that slide.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
In terms of the breakdown based on, the taxable properties, grant in lieu, municipal portion only, the amount of exempt, the assessment summary on this slide breaks that down for you. So completely taxable property ends up being almost $900 million. Grant in lieu from the province or the federal government, relatively low at about 2.5 million. Municipal taxable only about 12 million. And then the total of the grant in lieu, municipal, and the taxable is about 913 million. And then the exempt total is about 217 million. So I could read these numbers to you, but I don't think there's a lot of value in that. So I've provided this free information. If you have questions about it, please let me know.
So the exempt total, what is the exempt?
So those are properties that are exempt from taxation in some fashion. And that is the total value, regardless of what type of property it is, whether it's residential, whether it's a group home, seniors, what have you. So all of that bundled up is around 217 million.
So schools and churches, are they in that one or not?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Okay, so the province has told us that they're probably going to increase the rate of their grant in lieu payback. So we would be looking at that 402 number and the 217 million number as what they're basing something on, or not? Maybe got the wrong one.
These numbers wouldn't change. What you would see is an increase in the revenue sent to the town based on the existing numbers here. So my understanding is they're around, I don't know, 60 or 50% they would pay, and now it's up to 75. So that doesn't impact the valuation of the properties. That impacts how much they're going to send based on their existing valuations.
But the bottom line is it's based on those 402 properties or records?
No.
Those would be in there or not?
I apologize. No, that wouldn't be those. It would be the second from the top, the grant in lieu.
The two?
Yeah.
Sorry, CAO Miller?
Your worship, just a reminder that the exempt properties would also include all the properties the town owns.
Well, I'm questioning the two. What's a two?
Yeah. Yeah, there's not many.
Yeah.
It's federal and provincial. Oh, we have provincial grants and then federal grants.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I apologize for not being a bit more clear on that. And it's effectively a way for the federal government and the provincial government to recognize the services and the wear and tear that their properties may either benefit from or incur on the town.
Thank you.
So the residential focus in terms of single family detached taxable residential properties, I have a number of maps here indicating where we're seeing some value shifts. So this first image is residential properties that have either increased 5% or decreased 5%. So kind of just wavering around that almost no change mark. And this is one of the largest portions of residential property where it's 77% of the inventory, making up 1,513 properties. So based on this map, where you see it highlighted, this is the areas where residential properties, residential ratepayers are typically going to see a wavering of the value around 0%, give or take 5. The next slide is an increase in residential from 6 to 19%. So these are the areas where you're going to see residential properties increase anywhere from, obviously, as I just said, 6 to 19%. A much smaller portion overall, 21% of the inventory is going to see an increase within this range, about 416 properties. We did overall see, as we saw earlier on the slide, an increase on average for residential. I think I'll just back up real quick to that figure. So right here, this is residential across the board. It's about 3%, but I wanted to zoom in and give you guys a bit better of an idea of where some of that value shifting is going to occur. So as again, -5 to +5, +6 to 19.
So to me, they look very similar with the second one, just kind of being more spotty in the same areas.
Yeah. So the second one here, you're going to see, if we back it up to the first one, for example, Saddleback Ridge, Shafterbury, you're going to see properties in there that are either really not increasing or increasing anywhere from 6 to 19%.
So for example, Westbrook, we see on the first map, and then we don't see it on the second one, so that means that they will not be unchanged. They will be on the first map, or not unchanged, but the -5 to 5.
Yeah.
And then, because they're not. Okay.
Yeah, so on the second map, because you don't see it there, you won't be seeing those types of increases for those homeowners.
Thank you. Oops.
So increases residentially from 20 to 80%. And I want to point out that based on the revaluation, there was no increases for residential that were higher than 80%. So as you can see,
To go to 80%, do you go from a vacant land or an old house you knock down to make a mansion, or how do you go to 80%?
often it's the completion of a pre-existing incomplete property. That's really what this slide is showing. So there's not many, there's only 18 properties. So as valuation goes on from year to year, it may not align with the construction cycle of a property. You may have been building a property over a couple of years, it's half done, there's some value there, but it's really not picked up until it's entirely complete. Now, for the single family reductions, anywhere from -6 to 19%, which is about 23 properties, you're going to see these on the north and the east side of the town for the most part. And the majority of these are driven by sales, not so much they, knock down half the property or anything like that. So this is a shifting in the market itself. And finally, anything that has gone down more than 20%, statistically 0% of the inventory, about 5 properties, this is where you're going to see something that's been completely damaged or demolished, that sort of thing. So that's what we're looking at on this slide. So there's really not that many that are crashing in terms of what the market is doing. So my interval.
No, just wait.
Oh, okay. Sorry. What I see from these is that the market for the most part is increasing. And when we are seeing changes on the edges of the bell curve at the high end or the low end, there's reasoning behind it. Either something's been damaged or something has been completed. So we're not seeing a massive shift due to all of a sudden everybody in one area paying twice as much for houses than they did last year, we're seeing a general rising of the tide that raises all boats. So finally, just a summary table here with the total number of single family in the center, the proportional percentage on the right-hand side, and just the breakdown of what we saw in the previous 5 slides. Any questions about what I've presented or assessment in general?
Counselors,
I have this one.
Counselor Shannon?
You know, all these little I'm just gonna call them hot spots for lack of a better word, but is there a way that we can identify what those places are, like what those properties are, so it would better help understand what you're trying to teach us here, or what I'm trying to understand, and like it would help if I knew, so I could compare and say, okay, that's a 0% inventory because of that, or do we not, we don't get to see what those actual properties are?
I can certainly, direct you to the website that will have the information on it. I can provide you specifically any information you'd be interested in. The mapping was frankly to try and avoid a massive table or a spreadsheet to go through everything. It was an attempt to more visualize where the values are shifting.
For my own education, I would like to see the website though. I think it would be helpful to me. Thank you.
Yeah.
The town's GIS system and whatnot, I know we can go on there someplace and look, so that would maybe help Counselor Shannon, right? If you knew the property address kind of thing, you can see something there. I don't know if it's what you want, but
yeah, and kudos to the town. The GIS system that you have online is fairly robust and it's quite impressive. You can actually see information on the properties from a number of years ago as well, so you can see how things have trended in what direction.
Okay, any further questions? We're all up on our assessment information now. It's people that like to play with data. It's exciting stuff. Councillor CAO Miller.
Through your worship, I wonder if you would just speak a little bit about the appeal process.
Absolutely. So the appeal process, when somebody disagrees with their assessment, there is an avenue in the provincial statute and regulations that allows them to challenge it in order to reduce it, in order to have a local third party take a look at it afresh based on what the owner or the complainant has to say and based on what the assessor has to say. Now that's limited to residential style properties, the local assessment review board. If there is a commercial property, warehouse, hotel, something like that, then a chair from the province comes in, made up of also local representatives, and that is called the Composite Assessment Review Board. And they sit and hear evidence from the owner, or often when it's a non-residential property, their tax agent, a company or person hired that specializes in reviewing property and reducing the assessment versus the assessor. So the approach that I like to take is to be as helpful as I can with ratepayers when they call in, because it's going to do one of a couple things. Number one, it's going to explain the process to them and help them understand whether or not there is an issue. Number two, it's going to show them how or why the assessment is where it is. And number three, it's frankly going to help me figure out whether or not there is an issue that we can address and fix. So the more communication, the more education that I give the ratepayers when I speak to them, the better the results are. The last thing that I like to see is going all the way to an assessment appeal and having somebody appear who is completely baffled by the entire process, because that's a waste of their time, it's a waste of the board's time, it's a waste of my time, and it's a waste of the town's resources. So they may not agree with how things are done, but I can certainly tell them and show them resources from third parties online about how it is done. So when it comes to an assessment appeal process, I don't shy away from it. But I also want to make sure that I serve the town by serving its citizens and making sure they're informed.
And the dates on the dates to appeal and whatnot are fairly stringent in terms of it's that date or not, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and they have 60 days. I mean, you know, a number of years ago, you only had 30. And, you know, with a lot of changes to the Municipal Governing Act and the matters related to assessment and taxation regulation, you know, they've widened that to give people more time. And I think nothing but good comes from that. Because either we're gonna, you know, meet in an appeal with two strong cases that the board is going to decide which one is victorious, or, you know, kind of split it down the middle, or it's going to get resolved beforehand. So I think it's nothing but positives out of it.
Okay, any further questions? Well, thank you very much. It was very informative and I think it made sense too, so that was helpful. So good luck with the process in this year and future years, and hopefully people will pick up the phone or whatever they need to do to contact your office if they have questions about their assessments this year too.
Absolutely. Yes, give us a call, and even in the council. So, Your Worship, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for letting me come here and present and listen to me drone on.
Do you have any cards?
Not on me, but I know that there are some at the front.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you and safe travels.
Thank you.